We'll be starting in the first chapter of 2 Samuel tonight. Of course, we know from last week's lesson in chapter 31 of 1 Samuel about the death of Saul. And not only Saul, but three of his sons were killed with him in the battle against the Philistines. They didn't have any defense for the arrows, bows and arrows that the Philistines used, and so they were taken down pretty quickly, and ended up Saul and his bodyguard or companion there took their own lives to keep the Philistines from getting hold of them before they died, and inflicting torture on them. And so now we come to 2 Samuel in the first chapter, first verse. Now it came to pass after the death of Saul, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, and David had abode 2 days in Ziklag. Now we all know the story about the Amalekites capturing all of the children and the wives of David's army folks, and took them captive, and they burned Ziklag. But apparently there was enough left till David and his men were still able to come back here and set up some sort of a camp to just rest up from going after the Amalekites. And they'd been back about 2 days. And it says, it came to pass in verse 2, it came even to pass on the third day that, behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul with his clothes rent and earth upon his head. And so it was when he came to David that he fell to the earth and did obeisance. And this was the dirt on the head and the torn clothes. We know that was a common sign of mourning. This guy came feigning humility, more or less, as you'll see as this story goes on. And David said unto him, from whence comest thou? And he said unto him, out of the camp of Israel am I escaped. And David said unto him, how went the matter? I pray thee, tell me. And he answered, that the people are fled from the battle, and many of the people also are fallen and dead, and Saul and Jonathan his son are dead also. And David said unto the young man that told him, how knowest thou that Saul and Jonathan his son be dead? And the young man that told him said, as I happened by chance upon Mount Gilboa, behold, Saul leaned upon his spear, and lo, the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me and called unto me. And I answered, here am I. And he said unto me, who art thou? And I answered him, I am an Amalekite. He said unto me, stand, I pray thee, upon me, and slay me, for anguish has come upon me, because my life is yet whole in me. So I stood upon him and slew him, because I was sure that he could not live after that he was fallen. And I took the crown that was upon his head, and the bracelet that was on his arm, and have brought them hither to my Lord. This was a blatant lie. This is not what happened. Last week's account of what happened is the factual account. This is a made-up story that this Amalekite man decided to tell David about what went on there. About the only truth in that is the fact that Saul and Jonathan were dead. They were taken in the battle, or immediately after the battle, while the battle was still going on. Saul and his companion, and he told him that he had him by chance on Mount Gilboa. Why he was there, I just assumed that he had seen the battle and was looking for spoils, is my only assumption on this matter. Something that he could use to gain favor. He just assumed that it would be good news to David that Saul was dead. and that he had had a hand in killing Saul. And as you'll see, that had its consequences for this young man. It says, then David took hold of his clothes and rent them, and likewise all the men that were with him. And they mourned and wept and fasted until even for Saul and for Jonathan his son, and for the people of the Lord, and for the house of Israel, because they were fallen by the sword. David, this just shows you that David's heart was pure as far as Saul went. He showed him that time after time by sparing his life. He knew that Saul was God's anointed king, and so he was heartbroken, and not only for Saul, of course, but for his dear friend Jonathan, that was so close to him. They were like brothers. They had great love between them, one for the other. And so his heart was broken, and all the men that were with him, of course, they were part of the Israelite family, and so they too didn't want to see their king fallen in this manner. It had to happen sooner or later, so that David could assume the throne. But still, David was heartbroken by the circumstance. And if this man thought that he did good by killing Saul, who was the anointed of God, anointed king of God, he was sadly mistaken. Verse 13 says, and David said unto the young man that told him, whence art thou? And he answered, I am the son of a stranger, and Amalekite. And David said unto him, how wast thou not afraid to stretch forth thine hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? If he would have been an Israelite, he would have known that that was not what you would do to lift your hand to an anointed king like that, because you weren't just offending the Israelites, you were offending the Israelites' God. That was a big deal, especially to someone like David. David called one of the young men and said, go near and fall upon him. And he smote him that he died. This was such an offense that it was a death penalty for this young man. I'm sure that he thought by bringing these baubles that he took, the crown that he took from Saul, and the bracelets that actually went above the wrist on his arms, those were the signs of a king. And so I'm sure that he thought he would trade those for a reward of some sort, or some favor from David. But what he got was actually more or less what he deserved for trying to trick David in this manner, and telling him falsely that he took Saul's life himself. And David said unto him, thy blood be upon thy hand, for thy mouth hath testified against thee, saying, I have slain the Lord's anointed. David spoke to the man's body more or less, and he said, you got what you deserve, because you yourself told us what you had done by raising your hand against this anointed king, even though that's really not the story. That's not what happened. It was a lie. To think he could gain favor with this story, he picked the wrong people to try to do that with. And the last part of chapter 1, we'll see that David, being a musician, a poet, it was common back in that day when a ruler would pass away, that especially if it was in battle, that they would write some kind of a song and for them, and that's what these last verses are. This song, it says, and David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and Jonathan his son. Also he bade them teach the children of Judah the use of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Jasher. Now the book of Jasher is the Israelite book of battles and wars. And so this particular verse would have been entered in to that book of Jasher after he wrote it. And he mentions the bow here. Some of the commentaries I read said this When they wrote one of these songs, it was actually given a name, and David actually named this psalm the bow. And he took action after this happened. We talked about the fact that the bow and arrow is what really turned the tide for the Philistines in their battle against the Israelites. The Israelites had no deterrent for these arrows coming at them. And so as a result of this, David later would make it a point to teach all the young men the use of a bow and arrow, and that would be used in battles probably from this time on with the Israelite army. Then he goes on to say in verse 19, the beauty of Israel is slain upon the high places. How are the mighty fallen? He's talking, of course, about Saul, and Jonathan calls him the beauty of Israel. It's thought that he's comparing them to a gazelle or a graceful animal. The fact that they were there defending Israel and trying to fight this battle, he's comparing them to beautiful animals of grace, but now they're fallen. Tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. He's telling them, don't let it be published in Gath or Ashkelon. Both of these are Philistine provinces, and and he mentions the fact that this news that Saul was killed and Jonathan was killed in battle, and the Israelites were defeated, would have caused the young girls of these places to dance in the streets, celebrating the victory of the Philistines. And David didn't want that. He didn't want that to be told of these cities. Ye mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew, neither let there be rain upon you, nor fields or offerings, for there the shield of the mighty is vilely cast away. The shield of Saul, as though he had not been anointed with oil. The shield was a very important thing to a warrior, to not just a king, but to all the warriors. They were prized possessions. Each one was decorated in a way that represented the thoughts or wishes of its owner. They were polished. They were taken very good care of. They polished them with oil each time they were used when they came back from a battle. They were very important to him. The fact that they were now strewn on the ground, that just showed, and not just Saul's. Saul was dead, but that's the reason his was lying on the ground. But the Israelites were trying so desperately to get away from the Philistines and to save their own lives that they actually dropped their shields in the field there. These shields that they've taken such good care of all this time. It says the mighty is vilely cast away in the shield of Saul, as though he had not been anointed with oil. I like the fact that it talks about Gilboa, the mountains there. Kind of a prediction that let there be no dew, let there be no rain. David thought of this holy ground. This is where Saul, the Lord's anointed, was slain. And he's asking that the rain and the mist and the dew be withheld. And even today, I understand this is a barren land. Nothing grows on Mount Gilboa. There's no grass or anything there. From the blood of the slain and from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives and in their death. They were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, and they were stronger than lions. He's giving praise for them, for their courage. Saul knew that he was going to die in this battle, and he went in anyway. Samuel had already told him that this was going to be his final day, and his sons were going to be killed also. But still, he went and fought valiantly with all he had in this last battle that he was ever to be in. And David praised him and Jonathan for that. And and all the children of Israel that fought there. Ye daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and with other delights, who put on ornaments of gold upon your apparel. It was common back in those days. The women in the Eastern culture, as this was, liked to dress in bright colors and pretty things, and wore baubles of gold upon their apparel as well. And Saul had seen to it that there was enough plenty that they could do that. They could wear nice clothes, and he took care of them in that manner. How are the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? O Jonathan, thou wast slain in thine high places. I am distressed of thee, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant hast thou been unto me. Thy love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. He talks about here of his relationship with Jonathan. You know, I mentioned last week, Jonathan was such a good friend to David. They were so close and as brothers. And still, Jonathan never took up any hatred for his father because of the way his father felt about David. He would not do that. This was not only his father, this was a king. And so he honored Saul, and at the same time tried to help David as he escaped. And I think God was with Jonathan in this. I remember a few chapters back that Saul was looking for David and took 3,000 men with him and looked where he knew David was in that area, and he still couldn't find him. And Jonathan just went out and took a walk and walked right into David's camp. Do you think that was by accident? I don't. I think God was showing Jonathan the way, because he was a help to David, taking care of him and keeping Saul from finding him and slaying him. But the last verse says, how are the mighty fallen, and the weapons of war perished. The weapons of war he's talking about is Saul and his sons, not their weapons, but they are the weapons. They are the ones that gave battle and tried to defeat the Philistines, but it wasn't to happen. It wasn't to happen that day. This was to be Saul's final day. But still, David lamented over that. That was not, he knew that he was going to eventually be king. And for that to happen, that it was going to cost Saul his life, but it wouldn't be at David's hand. David would not take up arms against Saul, and had the opportunity so many times, but would not do it because he was the anointed of the Lord, just as David was also. And so very good reading in this chapter. The fact that David found out that Saul and his sons had been killed broke his heart. He was tried to be tricked and duped and perhaps tricked into paying a price by this Amalekite, and David took action against him. And then this lamentation that he wrote, this song that he wrote in honor of not just Saul and David, but in all the fallen of Israel, and the ones that have been forced to flee as a result of this. So that's chapter 2. Any questions or comments?
Larry, I thought it was kind of funny that David there at the end says that he loved Jonathan more than he loved women. Because David, if he had one problem, it was women. Like, that was his biggest problem he had. He loved women. So I just thought that was really funny that he chose to put that in there, even that he loved Jonathan more than he loved the women.
He took a new wife every time he tripped over one.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So I just thought that was really funny.
I thought that was pretty cool too. The way he said that was kind of odd. And I said this is chapter 2. This is chapter 1. We'll be starting in chapter 2 next week. But any other comments or questions?